They say truth is the first casualty of war. But what about peace? Hidden inside forgotten drawers and dusty archives, there are documents, official letters, proof of what governments did to their own people. Each page marked top secret, each stamped with the same phrase, for national security. But these weren't operations meant to protect. They were designed to test, to observe, to study the human body as if it were an equipment. And the test subjects were ordinary people. 4 files survived the purge, 4 projects the world was never meant to see. What you're about to hear wasn't fiction. It was government science, the kind that never asked permission. These are 4 disturbing government secrets they don't want you to see. The first file opens in 1953, a time when the atomic age was new and the air itself shimmered with invisible fallout. After a decade of nuclear tests, scientists wanted to know how radioactive dust, specifically strontium-90, was building up inside human bone. But there was no ethical way to find out, so they didn't ask for ethics. Hospitals, morgues, and universities began sending samples. The word sample sounded harmless. It wasn't. Across America, Europe, and Australia, thousands of dead bodies, mostly infants and children, were quietly harvested for their bones. Doctors were instructed to retain specimens for research. They cut rib cages, extracted femurs, removed teeth, then labeled the remains by age, gender, and country. All of it fed into one hidden database, Project Sunshine. Between 1953 and 1962, more than 1,500 corpses were dissected without consent. Most families were never told. Some parents thought they were burying their whole child, but years later learned their baby's skeleton was in a US government laboratory. In one case, a British mother, Jean Pratt, discovered in 1995 that her infant daughter's bones had been shipped across the ocean for testing. She'd kept the child's photograph on her dresser for 40 years, but she'd never buried her whole. The program continued even after public outrage over nuclear testing. The US Atomic Energy Commission defended it as vital for public safety. But what safety requires robbing graves? The documents were declassified decades later, their tone disturbingly casual. Phrases like, obtain samples aged newborn to 10 years. It was logistics to them. To everyone else, it was desecration. The name Sunshine was deliberate. It sounded bright, clean, but it masked a project built on the darkest part of humanity. Curiosity without conscience. Number 3. The second file is dated September 1950. A US Navy ship drifts quietly through the San Francisco Bay. No flags, no warning. Its tanks are filled, not with oil or fuel, but bacteria. Over 6 days, the crew sprays a massive red-tinted mist into the coastal fog. They track wind direction, humidity, temperature. A live military experiment unfolding over an American city. The bacteria was called Serratia marcescens, chosen for visibility under microscope, believed to be harmless. They were wrong. Within days, doctors at Stanford Hospital began to notice infections with a strange crimson hue, wounds that refused to heal, fevers no antibiotic could stop. A 75-year-old man named Edward Nevin went in for surgery. His incision became infected with Serratia. He died in agony, his heart consumed by bacteria released from a US Navy experiment. His family never knew. The official cause was complications. It would take nearly 3 decades before Operation Sea Spray came to light, revealed in 1977 hearings before the US Senate. Officials admitted conducting 239 open-air tests of biological and chemical agents between 1949 and 69. Cities like St. Louis, Minneapolis, and New York had also been sprayed. Each time, the public was left breathing what they couldn't see. When questioned, military representatives described the tests as harmless. But Serratia isn't harmless. It causes infections, pneumonia, and endocarditis. Even a single cell entering a vulnerable person's bloodstream can be fatal. The death of Edward Nevin wasn't an accident. It was collateral damage in an experiment he never volunteered for. The city's fog carried the mist for miles. Children played outside. Mothers hung clothes to dry. And the US Navy took notes. Number 2. March 1st, 1954. A blinding flash above the Pacific turns night into day. The United States detonates Castle Bravo, its most powerful hydrogen bomb, at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. They expected 6 megatons of yield. They got 15. The blast vaporized islands and left a crater 2 kilometers wide. But the most devastating part wasn't the explosion, it was the cloud. A rolling mass of radioactive dust that drifted east, straight into inhabited islands, where families were still asleep. Children woke to find white flakes falling from the sky. They called it snow. They rubbed it on their arms. They laughed. Within hours, their skin blistered. Hair fell out in clumps. Their tongues swelled until they couldn't speak. When American ships arrived, the islanders begged for help, but the military didn't evacuate immediately. Instead, they documented everything. Skin lesions, vomiting. They drew blood, took photos, logged the radiation levels of each victim. That field study became Project 4.1. Officially, the study of response of human beings exposed to significant beta and gamma radiation. It wasn't rescue, it was research. Over the next years, doctors monitored the survivors. Many developed thyroid tumors. Pregnant women miscarried. Some children were born with missing bones, translucent skin, or no eyes at all. Their island, Rongelap, was declared safe years later, only for radiation readings to still show deadly contamination. When the survivors relocated again in the 1980s, their cancers had already spread. Declassified memos later revealed the truth. The government had planned to study radiation effects on civilians even before the explosion went wrong. The test was an opportunity. The people were data points. Number 1. The final file begins in 1945. The war had just ended. The world was celebrating peace. But behind laboratory doors, a new kind of war was starting. One against the human body itself. The United States wanted to understand radiation poisoning, how much exposure kills, how long before tissues begin to rot from the inside out. So they began experiments. In Tennessee, patients admitted for minor surgeries were injected with plutonium and uranium. They were never told. In Chicago, doctors gave pregnant women cocktails laced with radioactive iron. They said it was for nutrition research. The unborn children absorbed the poison. Many later developed deformities and cancers. At a state school in Massachusetts, mentally disabled boys were fed cereal dusted with radioactive isotopes. The kids believed they were joining a science club. They even received certificates of participation signed by researchers from Harvard and MIT. One file describes a man named Albert Stevens. Doctors told him he had stomach cancer. They injected plutonium directly into his bloodstream. He lived another 20 years, never knowing he was one of the most irradiated humans on Earth. After his death, his bones were harvested for study. He became Case 40. Across the country, hospitals quietly conducted hundreds of these trials. Prisoners, soldiers, expectant mothers, orphans, none were told what was being done. Each received doses calculated to study internal decay. For decades, the experiments remained buried in archives marked AEC, Human Test Subjects, until journalist Eileen Welsam uncovered the files in 1993. What she found filled entire boxes, dosage charts, patient codes, photos of skeletons stored in drawers, and chilling memos. It is undesirable to make known to the patient that he is being injected with plutonium. That wasn't a doctor writing, it was a bureaucrat, someone giving instructions on how to keep victims ignorant. In 1994, the government admitted to over 400 radiation experiments between 1944 and 1974. Thousands of citizens had been exposed. They called it a grave ethical failure, but ethics were never part of the plan. Because for 30 years, they treated people like containers, filled them, measured them, buried them. We like to think the past is safer than the present, that the worst is behind us. But these files say otherwise. Bones stolen from the dead, bacteria sprayed over cities, islanders left to die in radioactive snow, men and children poisoned by their own doctors. Each file stamped the same way, for national security, each marked classified for decades. And if these are the secrets that eventually confessed, what about the ones still sealed? The truth isn't hidden in bunkers or vaults, it's hidden in reports, footnotes, and words buried under black ink. When a government stops asking for permission, the line between science and horror disappears.